Right, so this PowerPoint is on the different blood vessels we have in the body, how they're structured, and they're all basically in energy production and waste removal. So the first part's just a recap on last week. So have a little click on the purpose games when you download the PowerPoint. The purpose game's already embedded in Blackboard anyway, but it's just labeling the heart. So the 14 structures we learned about the heart last week. And you just practicing because you need to know the structure of the heart. What I'd like you to do now is if you pause the video and have a read through and just try and have a little think about what each blank is. So you've just revised the chambers of the heart, the structures of the heart. So now you've done that, you should be able to work out what goes where. So if you pause the video and have a little read through. Okay, now you've paused the video and you've had a think of what your answers are. Let's have a look at them. So the heart splits into two sides and has 4 chambers. The top 2 chambers are called atria, and the bottom 2 chambers are called ventricles. Heart is split into 2 separate sides by the septum. There are 4 valves that allow the blood to pass through the heart in one direction. The valve between the atrium and ventricle on the right side of the heart is called the tricuspid valve. So if you remember last week, excuse me, I said when you go shopping, you're looking for clothes, you try before you buy. So if you look at a diagram of the heart, tricuspid comes before the bicuspid. You try before you buy. So tricuspid's on the right. The valve on the left side of the heart between the atrium and ventricle is called the bicuspid valve, which is also known as the mitral valve. The valve between the pulmonary artery and the right ventricle is known as the semilunar valve, but it's also known as the pulmonary valve. And the valve between the left ventricle and the aorta is called the aortic valve. So by the end of this lesson, you know the different blood vessels. Some of you should be able to identify the structural differences, and hopefully some of you will be able to explain the structural differences. If you look in terms of like BTEC criteria, objectives 1 and 2 are very much pass, and objective 3 is more merit. So we've got 5 blood vessels, okay? So we got veins, venules, capillaries, arterioles, and arteries. Now, just by looking at the colours of them, you should be able to work out which is for oxygenated and which is for deoxygenated blood. So generally, as we said last week, colour blue is for deoxygenated blood and the colour red is for oxygenated blood. And let's first look at arteries and arterioles. So first thing you need to know about arteries is they pump oxygenated blood around the body. That is the role of arteries. They have narrow lumens, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later, but the lumen is basically the hole going through the blood vessel. So they have narrow lumens. And they need a narrow lumen because if you think about exercise, you went over this in physiology, think about when you're exercising, you need blood to get to your working muscles as quickly as possible. Now, by having a narrow lumen, that allows that blood pressure to increase. If you've got higher pressure, blood's going to go much quicker. Think about in the summer when you got your garden hose out and the water's not going that far, what you would do to make it go further and make the pressure increase is just cover over the end with your thumb, reducing the hole at the end, and then it'll go through much faster and it'll travel much further. And that's why we have narrow lumens, so the blood can go through much quicker. They're very, very strong, and the reason they need to be strong is because they need to pump blood at high pressure. So we just talked about high blood pressure, and they need to be very strong to withstand that blood pressure. If your artery bursts, you're going to bleed out and die very, very quickly. What I need you to remember, and we talked about this last week, arteries away. Arteries will always, always, always carry blood away from the heart. That is their role. They'll carry blood away from the heart. Now, thinking back to last week, there's one artery that carries deoxygenated blood. What I'd like you to do is pause the video now, have a think for 30 seconds, see if you can work out which one it is. Okay, now you're back and from pausing the video. Hopefully you've worked out it's the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery has to carry deoxygenated blood because it carries blood from the right side of the heart. So you should remember from last week, the right side of the heart is always to do with deoxygenated blood. And since arteries always carry blood away, the role of the pulmonary artery is to carry deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle up to the lungs. So it needs to get oxygenated at the lungs. So this is the only artery that will carry deoxygenated blood in the body. After arteries have come straight from the heart, we have structure called arterioles. Now these are like arteries, very similar, but they're a smaller version. So when we start getting near muscle tissue or near to organs, the arterioles branch off from the arteries. Now they've got more smooth muscle to control the blood flow. I've asked the question why here, so if we were actually in a lesson, we'd have had a discussion about this. And what I want you to think about is blood travels extremely quick through the arteries, very, very quick. So we've got to get blood very, very quickly. Now, the role of blood is to basically share nutrients with the body. So let's just think of it in terms of oxygen at the minute. So we're exercising and we need lots and lots of oxygen. If your blood's going really, really fast past those muscles, are we effectively going to be able to transfer oxygen to these muscle cells and then remove the carbon dioxide and get rid of it? If you're going as fast as you possibly can. What I'd like to think about now, imagine you've got a rugby ball and you're sprinting as fast as you can. And to the left-hand side of you, there's a hoop. So you've got the top speed and you've got to pass that ball through the hoop. You're not going to be as accurate when you're really, really fast. Now, if you slow down to a jog and even to a walk, you would be much more accurate passing that rugby ball through the hoop. Now, this is the same in terms of oxygen transfer. We need this smooth muscle because the blood vessel will vasoconstrict or vasodilate to either increase speed or decrease speed of the blood. Now, by vasodilating and making it bigger, we reduce blood pressure. So the smooth muscle there will increase the arterial size slightly to allow the blood to slow right down. Now, by slowing the blood down, it's going to allow for effective oxygen transfer at the working muscles and at the organs, and that is the main reason we need to control the blood flow. Right, capillaries. Capillaries are your smallest blood vessel, and they're around all your muscle tissue and your organs, and they're what is to do with oxygen transfer and nutrient transfer between the blood. So like I said, they're the thinnest blood vessel. They're made of a single layer of endothelial cells. So an endothelial cell is just the outside of a capillary, and it's made of just a single layer. Now, if you think about this logically, we want it to be as thin as possible, don't we? Oxygen, well, gases do something called diffusing. Now, diffusing is basically just gas transfer. So if you think about oxygen going to the cells and carbon dioxide going back into the blood, the thinner the wall we have, the quicker we're able to transfer that oxygen. Okay, we want to make that as quick a transfer as possible when we're exercising, because the more energy we have and the more waste products we can remove, the better we're going to perform. So by having such a thin layer, it allows that to be a very, very quick process. What they do as well, they bring blood as close as possible to all cells. And again, if you think about it, that's really logical. By having them as close to the cells as possible in that single layer, that's allowing the the gas transfer and nutrient transfer to be much more effective process and as quick as possible. So, like I said, it exchanges oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, salts between the blood and the surrounding body tissues. Large quantities cover the muscle. Now, the reason we need it to cover like the whole muscle, there's no point in just energizing half of the muscle, because then you can't use the other half effectively. By having a great capillary network all around the muscle, that allows all the muscle cells to get energized and to be used at once. So obviously, if you're going to use a whole muscle cell, sorry, not a whole muscle cell, a whole muscle, that's going to produce a stronger muscle contraction than only being able to utilize half of your muscle. And here, if you just look, you can see the endothelium and how that's a very, very thin layer. Now, if we look at the lumen, what you need to know about this is they're only big enough to let one blood cell through at a time. So that's another reason that arterioles need to control the blood flow, because if they didn't slow blood down, there'd be a big blood pooling system, because you wouldn't be able to get the blood through the capillaries because it'd be going too quick. By slowing it down, allows the blood to effectively transfer into capillaries and go through effectively. Last part of the blood vessel family is veins and venules. So what branches between a vein and the capillary is the venule. What that does basically is drain blood from the capillaries into the veins. So like the arteriole is a slightly smaller version of an artery, the venule is like a slightly smaller version of a vein. Now veins, what their job is to return blood to the heart. So it's all to do with venous return. You should have learned about this in physiology, but just all that is the return of blood to the heart. They have the same walls as arteries, but they're thinner and less elastic and muscular. This is because the blood isn't going to be going through such a high pressure. The pressure is much lower in terms of arteries. Due to this, they have a wider lumen. So if we think of the hose example again, if your hose pipe has a wider end, it's not going to come out as quick. They have valves to prevent the backflow of blood. Now, we talked about this in terms of the heart last week. The whole point of a valve is it opens one way and then shuts, so it only lets blood travel in one direction. Now, think about blood going to the lower part of your body, and when you're stood up, it's very hard to get that blood back up to the heart. So we need valves to stop the blood going back the other way. Otherwise, we'll get something called blood pooling. This is why it's really important to cool down after exercise, because you can have the vascular shunt mechanism, which is basically where you use the skeletal muscle pump. Skeletal muscle pump is where your muscles are contracting, and they contract against the valves, and they can actually push blood back up through, not against your valves, sorry, against your veins. They can push blood back up through the veins and towards the heart. And that's what helps with the return of blood to the heart. Right, so there's three main structural layers to blood vessels. First one is the outer layer called the tunica externa. It's a very outer layer. It's largely made up of collagen and elastin fibers. This helps give it its strength. And it supports the blood vessels and acts as a shock absorber. So just think about playing sport. If you get tackled in any sport, you need shock absorption there to allow the blood vessel to still work effectively. Now, the tunica media, that's the middle layer, and that makes sense because it says media. If you look at the terms externa media, it makes perfect sense. It's the external layer, and it's the middle layer. So it's mainly smooth muscle with elastic layers and collagen, and this is the part that controls vasodilation and vasoconstriction, okay? The part that controls blood pressure. And the tunica intima, again, that sounds like internal, so make sure it makes sense that it's the internal layer. So it's composed of those smooth epithelial cells named endothelium. Now, they need to be smooth again to stop friction. So as we talked about in the heart, if there's friction between the blood and the heart, or blood and the blood vessels, that's no good for us because it won't be able to go through as smooth. If you think about like Velcro and trying to rip it apart against each other, that's just going to go a lot slower than if you had, say, just two pieces of cotton fabric going against each other. You need it to be nice and smooth so the blood can get through really, really effectively. It helps us in exercise. Okay, this just shows really, really well the way that we go from the heart and the way it goes through different blood vessels. So from the heart, we go straight to the arteries. Now, if you look at your arteries, you can see those narrow lumens there. And if you look at them compared to the left-hand side, they're much, much narrower. So like, remember I said that's because of the high blood pressure. You can also see that thicker outer layer as well. The tunica externa is much, much thicker. And that's to withstand those high pressures and protect the arteries. Once we go from arteries from the heart, we then go to arterioles, and you can see how that's got a more similar look to it of a capillary, because it's like a hybrid blood vessel almost, because it goes from arteries down to capillaries. Now, if we go to the capillary, you can see there's only one layer, as we talked about earlier. And then when we go from the capillary, we go to the venule, and it goes back up to the vein. And you can easily see a comparison between the two on the left and right hand sides in terms of structure, in terms of size of the lumens. And as we discussed earlier in the video, we discussed the reasons why these happen. When you download this PowerPoint, if you click on this image, it'll take you to the Quizlet. Take you to my Quizlet, so you can practice the terms, doing the scatter game or do the gravity game. You can test yourself. Make sure you use that for your assignments, because you need to know these key terminologies.